In this sikha, we're going to be speaking about the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and specifically how the mitzvah of Talmud Torah relates to teaching and educating children, and the impact that it has on us as well. We know we have the pasuk and the parsha, part of Shema, Voeschanan levanecha, about teaching our children Torah. So the Rebbe starts off the sikha by saying that in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, there are generally two ideas. There's a mitzvah of learning oneself, there's a mitzvah of teaching Torah to others, and specifically to your children. Says the Rebbe, we find over here something very, very interesting and amazing. Both the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe start off Hilchos Talmud Torah with the laws not of learning yourself Torah, but rather of teaching your child Torah. And the question is, shouldn't we first be speaking about your own obligation of learning Torah, and then we move on to teach your child Torah? And even simply, the reason there's an obligation to teach your child Torah is because every person has to learn himself Torah, and then following from that comes the obligation to teach it to your child as well. Especially, there's no way, says the Rebbe, you could even teach somebody else before you learn yourself. So why do we start off Hilchos Talmud Torah about teaching the child Torah? The Rebbe says simply we could say two reasons. Number one is, since there's an obligation min ha-Torah to learn Torah with a child, this is different to other mitzvahs where you don't have this mitzvah of chinuch. It's only midrabanan. So therefore, Hilchos Talmud Torah starts over the halachos of Talmud Torah the way it starts by every single person. In other words, every person, when does he start learning Torah? There's a mitzvah that even a little child should be taught Torah. So the halachos of Talmud Torah start off in age. You start off as a young boy, and this is part of the mitzvah that the father teaches the child Torah, and then you grow up and you're learning by yourself as well. So that's one thing we could say. Another thing that Rebbe says we could say is that the mitzvah of Talmud Torah and learning Torah and teaching Torah actually says many times in the Torah, but the main place where the mitzvah is learned out from, as the Rambam tells us, and counted in the mitzvahs of the Rambam, it's from the pasuk Voeschanan levanecha, teaching your child Torah. In other words, this is the main place where we learn out the learning Torah for your child, but also for yourself. And this is why this is the focus that we start off with Hilchos Talmud Torah, because this is the pasuk that it's all learned out from. However, the Rebbe says this itself needs to be understood. Why is Talmud Torah so unique in this way that, number one, that Talmud Torah, more than other mitzvahs, has a shaychus also to a child, and number two, that even the learning of the adult is included in Voeschanan levanecha? So the Rebbe first starts off by saying that we could say it may have something to do with the fact that the way we learn Torah these days compared to the way we're going to learn Torah when Mashiach comes. And the Rebbe says 2 points. Number one, we are told that the learning Torah these days is like hevel, is like nothing basically, like air, compared to the Torah we're going to learn when Mashiach comes, where we're going to be so smart and so wise, etc., etc., etc. And therefore, the learning Torah of nowadays is like a child compared to an adult when we're going to be the way we're going to be when Mashiach comes. Another idea, says the Rebbe, it also says that the learning of Torah these days is like a chinuch, preparing for the time the way we're going to be learning Torah when Mashiach comes. This is what helps us be ready for the Torah when Mashiach comes. And therefore, again, our Torah is like a child compared to the adult, compared to the adult learning Torah, and therefore, maybe that's why we focus so much on this idea of children learning Torah. But the Rebbe says this is not a good enough explanation. Why? Because the same thing is true we find regarding mitzvahs as well. That we do mitzvahs now are going to be the way we do mitzvahs now is, again, only very little compared to the mitzvahs, the way we're going to do them, l'aseh lavi, in the most perfect way, and that the mitzvahs we're doing now, in a certain sense, is like a preparation for the mitzvahs that are going to be when Mashiach comes. So we're really back to the question, what is unique about Talmud Torah that we're so much connecting with this idea of learning with the child, and that even the learning of the adult is being learned out from the words Voeschanan levanecha. In order to explain this, the Rebbe looks at a difference between Torah and mitzvahs in regards to the idea of bitul. And the Rebbe says like this: when it comes to mitzvahs, the main focus is we're dealing with a gashmi, is the thing we're trying to elevate it, we're trying to refine it, we're trying to bring it closer to the Eibishter. Although it's true that you need to do a mitzvah because the Eibishter said so, but the bitul part of the mitzvah is not a crucial part to be able to fulfill the mitzvah properly. You did the mitzvah even if you did not have that bitul. Whereas when it comes to the idea of learning Torah, here says the Rebbe, it's a crucial in the idea that I'm putting myself aside in order to understand the truth of something. If I want to be able to understand something, not in a subjective way, not in a way where my mind is influencing My heart is influencing my understanding, but I'm really trying to understand something properly, especially when it comes to Torah. The Eibishter's Chachma, which is completely beyond me. If I really want to be able to understand Torah, I must put myself aside. I must have the idea of bittul first. And as Chazal say, there's the concept of Baruch Hu b'Torah Tchilu. You must make a bracha, first recognizing that it's the Eibishter's Torah. So this is the idea of bittul as a yesod, as a foundation before I start learning Torah. Another point, says the Rebbe, when I'm learning Torah, once again, it's going to be crucial that I have the inyan of bittul. And the Rebbe says, by mitzvahs, I'm doing what Hashem wants. So obviously, I don't need to be warned so many times and be told, make sure you have that bittul, because that's the whole point of what I'm doing a mitzvah. I'm doing what Hashem is asking me to do. When it comes to the idea of Torah, when my seichel is suddenly getting involved, and my seichel is becoming united with Hashem's Torah, there's a problem over here that sometimes a person could start convincing himself that I am so united with Hashem's Chachma, I'm so connected with Hashem's Chachma, that obviously I'm right, and that anybody that says anything different to me is going to be wrong. And therefore it's important to always keep in mind this idea of bittul that the person must have to Hashem, and he should never chas v'shalom try to see himself in a sense that he can't be wrong, and that his seichel is so connected with Hashem's seichel already that obviously he must be right, etc., etc. Says the Rebbe, these two ideas, number one, the bittul that I need to have before learning Torah, and number two, the bittul that I need to have when I'm learning Torah, are connected to the two ideas that we spoke about of the limud HaTorah of a child. That number one, there's a chiyuv of learning Torah with a child. That means the child has a chiyuv to learn Torah. And number two, that even as an adult, my limud HaTorah is coming from Voeschanan levanecha. That means with the attitude of a child. I'm learning like a child. And the Rebbe says these are the two ideas that are telling us that on the one hand, remembering that the foundation to my learning, when I'm learning Torah, I always need to start off that I'm like a child about to learn Torah. And this idea, the bittul, understanding that this is the Eibishter's Chachma beyond me, that applies equally to a child and to an adult. So I always need to bring out that child inside of me, that bittul inside of me, remembering that Torah is completely higher than myself. And on the other hand, even when I'm learning Torah, when I'm already involved in my seichel, and my seichel is becoming connected to Hashem, I need to remember it's all part of the Voeschanan levanecha, meaning to say that it's all with that bittul and with that sort of self nullification. The Rebbe then moves on in the Sikha and connects us with the Pirkei Avos of that particular Shabbos. And the Rebbe says in Peruk Revi'i we have two Mishnahs. The Rebbe says, number one, there's a Mishnah that says, Haloi mitoida yeled, when a person is learning Torah as a child, this is like ink, the Pirkei Avos says, being put on a fresh piece of paper. When a person learns Torah and he's older, it's like putting ink on a paper that was already erased many times. So the Rebbe says, I can understand the lesson that I'm being told to learn Torah while I'm young. But what's the idea of telling me that if I'm learning Torah while I'm old, it's like ink on an erased paper? Is it trying to discourage a person that was unsuccessful in his younger life not to learn Torah? So the Rebbe says, no, the pshat is, we're speaking about a person with the attitude that was telling him that he has to learn Torah like a child. In other words, with the bittul of a child. So if a person learns Torah with that bittul, then he's a keli to really absorb Hashem's chachma. If on the other hand, he has that attitude that he's a zokin, he understands everything already, then he's not going to be able to absorb Hashem's chachma. The next Mishnah the Rebbe focuses on is Shmuel HaKatan says, when your enemy falls, do not rejoice. When he stumbles, don't let your heart be gladdened, because in case Hashem will see and Hashem won't like it, it'll be bad in his eyes and remove the anger of that person and put it onto you. The famous question. Everything that Shmuel HaKatan says over here, that whole verse is directly from a pasuk in Mishlei. So what's going on over here? So the Rebbe quotes the Machzer Vitri and says that the pasuk was speaking about if people are enemies to each other in worldly matters. Shmuel HaKatan is coming to tell us that even in Torah you have to have this idea. Why would I think that in Torah maybe it would be okay to be happy when my enemy falls? Says the Rebbe, this goes back to the point we said before. A person may think, I'm so right in the area of Torah, so when I'm rejoicing, I'm not rejoicing because of myself. I'm rejoicing for the Torah. I'm so happy that the Torah had a victory. Comes Shmuel HaKatan and says that no. If your attitude is that the other person fell, then there's already a problem. There should only be the positive idea. Yes, the inyan in Torah was clarified, but if there could be such a situation that you feel the other guy was your enemy and he had a downfall, then obviously it's not a positive thing. And furthermore, says the Rebbe, if you would really understand that this is Hashem's Chachma, you would know there's a concept called Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. Just because you're right doesn't mean the other person is wrong. His words could be true in the world of Torah as well, even though if it's not the actual practical halacha. And therefore, even after the halacha, he's never your enemy and he never fell down. Says the Rebbe, but if you feel that feeling, that he's your enemy and you won, then that's showing that there's a certain problem and that what's really more important to you is your own ego rather than the Torah itself. Says the Rebbe, but a person could come along and argue and say, yeah, but the bottom line is, if it came to a matter of halacha, I saved this halacha from being chas v'shalom put in the wrong way, so it's good that he had his downfall and I came out right in halacha. Says the Rebbe, this is why Shmuel HaKatan says, Pen yira Hashem v'ra be'eino v'heishav me'olav apoi, which means to say that it's possible that the reason the other person was not mechaven to the halacha wasn't because he wasn't right in his seichel, he didn't have the right ideas, but it was some sort of punishment of Hashem, something that Hashem was not happy with that other person, and therefore, says the Rebbe, that don't rejoice that that punishment came about because of you, and on the contrary, if, as the pasuk goes on, that could cause to happen that the Eibusher should take the anger of that person and it should come onto this person himself who's rejoicing. Says the Rebbe, it's only through thinking in this particular way that you make sure that you're never rejoicing because another person had a downfall. Then you come to, as the Gemara says, when two people argue in a matter of halacha, they ultimately become friends with each other, and as the pasuk says, ha'emes v'ashalom ha'avu, just loving emes and peace.